The Northsiders now became part of the Chicago's bootlegging combine. As part of the agreement, O'Banion supplied Torrio and Capone with thugs to help them win the mayoral election in Cicero. O'Banion lived with Torrio's so-called deal for about 3 years before becoming displeased with it. Since the Cicero election, the city had become a virtual goldmine for the Southside Torrio Capone mob. As you would have guessed, O'Banion wanted a piece of the lucrative pie. To appease him, Torrio granted O'Banion some of Cicero's beer rights and a 25% interest in a casino called the Ship. The illustrious and business-savvy O'Banion went a step further and convinced a number of speakeasies in other Chicago territories to move to his strip in Cicero. This disastrous move had the potential to start a bootleg war. Torrio attempted to convince O'Banion to withdraw his potential deadly plan in exchange for some Southside brothel proceeds. However, being a devout Catholic, O'Banion angrily refused the offer as he was strictly against prostitution. Meanwhile, the Jenner brothers, who controlled Little Italy, which is located west of the Loop, began marketing their rock-gut booze on the north side in O'Banion's territory. O'Banion complained to Torrio about the Jenna's encroachment, but Torrio did nothing. O'Banion then raised the tension between himself and the Jennas on November 3rd by insisting that Angelo Jenna pay in full the $30,000 debt he owed to the Ship. Not one to back down, O'Banion then started hijacking Jenna liquor shipments. After it was discovered that O'Banion was hijacking the Jenna's liquor shipments, they decided to rub him out. However, as the Jennas were Sicilian, they owed fealty to the Union Siciliana, so they went to Mike Merlo to plead their case. However, Merlo disliked violence and preferred to settle things more peacefully and diplomatically, so, keeping with his traditions and values, he declined to okay the hit. Meanwhile, O'Banion continued to be on the offensive. In February of 1924, he moved against his Southside rivals by unsuccessfully trying to frame Torrio and Capone for the murder of Northside hangaround John Duffy. The tension between the Northside O'Banion mob and the Southside Torrio Capone mob reached a breaking point when, on May 19, 1924, a meeting took place at the Sibin Brewery. O'Banion wanted out of the rackets, so he wanted to sell Torrio his share of the brewery, a sum of $500,000. At the moment the money is handed over, the police raid the brewery. Torrio, O'Banion, and several Southside gangsters are arrested. But it doesn't end there. O'Banion was alerted of the impending raid, so he approached Torrio with the proposition to sell Torrio his share. Since this was O'Banion's first prohibition offense, he got off lightly. However, since this was Torrio's second offense, he had to spend a few nights in the slammer, not to mention bail himself and his men out of jail. To top it off, O'Banion refused to return the $500,000, which was given to him by Torrio, to buy out his share. So not only was Torrio in jail and facing an indictment, he was screwed out of the $500,000. So with all the double-crossing, the indictment, and the humiliation from losing $500,000, Torrio finally agreed with the Jennas to murder O'Banion. There was just still one minuscule problem. Mike Merlo, the Union Siciliana president of Chicago, still refused to give the go-ahead on the assassination of O'Banion. However, keep in mind, Mike Merlo was dying of a terminal cancer. Until he passed away, the O'Banion hit was a no-go. On November 8, 1924, Merlo passes away. The Jennas and the Torrio Capone mob were now free to make their move on O'Banion. Using the Merlo funeral as a ploy to come into the flower shop, many gangland luminaries from across the United States came into the flower shop to pre-order floral arrangements for the funeral. Keep in mind, the real intention of some of these gangsters was to get the layout of the flower shop while purchasing arrangements for the funeral. On the morning of November 10, 1924, O'Banion was clipping chrysanthemums in the back room of his shop. Frankie Yale, who was in town for the Merlo funeral, entered the store with Capone gunman John Scalise and Albert Anselmi. When O'Banion extended his hand to greet the trio with a handshake, Yale collapsed O'Banion's hand into a death grip. At the same time, Scalise and Anselmi fired 2 shots into O'Banion's chest, 2 into his cheek, and 2 into his throat. Dean O'Banion died instantly. Since O'Banion was a major crime figure, the Chicago Archdiocese refused Catholic burial on consecrated ground. However, the Lord's Prayer and 3 Hail Marys were recited in his honor by a priest who knew O'Banion since his childhood. The funeral was handled by Espargaro and Company undertakers. This particular funeral chapel, which was located 2 blocks west of the flower shop, dated back to 1885 and handled many of the funerals for gangland figures. On a final note, if you're looking for the definitive biography on Dean O'Banion, I highly recommend getting the book Guns N' Roses by Rose Keefe. You also might be interested in checking out DeanO'Banion.com.